Good morning, and thank you all for being here. My name is Peter Warda, and I'm representing the Santa Clarita Valley Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, please make sure you are using your questions box in the control panel throughout the webinar. We'll do our best to answer all of your questions. Today's webinar is important to the Santa Clarita Valley as we are an important community of interest. As you know, the city of Santa Clarita is the third largest city in the county of Los Angeles, and we are a growing and diverse community. So today we're pleased to host Commissioner Ahmad as we discuss the process for redistricting and what we can do to have our voices heard. So for everybody, as a bit of a background, California voters authorized the creation of the commission when they passed the Voters First Act in 2008. It authorized the commission to draw the new district lines. And then in 2010, the Congressional Voters First Act added the responsibility of drawing congressional districts to the commission. So every 10 years after the federal government publishes updated census information, California must redraw the boundaries of its congressional, state senate, state assembly, and state board of equalization districts so that they correctly reflect the state's population. So that process is currently underway, and as you know, the redistricting process has tremendous impactful implications on our region. So the lines determined by the commission have the potential to change congressional and legislative districts, which deeply affect how we elect our representatives. But with that, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Ahmad, who's now going to go into the process and discuss everything with us. So Commissioner, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak with your group today. I'm really excited to be here. And as Peter said, my name is Isra Ahmed. I serve as one of the 14 commissioners on the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. And before I begin the formal presentation, just wanted to introduce myself as I embark on this journey in the role of a commissioner. So I am from the Bay Area, California, specifically San Jose. In my day job, I work for local government, doing a lot of equity work. Next slide. So just as a friendly reminder, according to Government Code Section 82533, I am unable to receive any public input in this session. So that means particularly relating to the redistricting process, so drawing lines, for example. However, there are multiple avenues in which folks can share their input, and I will share more details about how to do that later on in the presentation. Next slide. So what is redistricting? We're trying really hard to make redistricting engaging, but it can be rather challenging. Redistricting is defined as drawing new boundaries that determine which Californians are represented by each electoral district. Next slide. So you might wonder why we have to redraw districts every 10 years. It's important to know that a lot changes in 10 years. So communities change in terms of their priorities, their interests, their goals, even the makeup of the community. People are born and die. People move within California and even out of California. Communities grow and shrink. Areas that were once roughly the same number of people become unequal. These are some of the reasons districts need to be redrawn. Particular to California, within the last year, you saw we had the COVID-19 pandemic, which could have contributed to some population shifts. We also had the California wildfires, which could have also displaced folks from their original place of residence. Next slide. One of the greatest powers that the people of California have is to elect their own representatives to conduct the business of their government. How the district boundaries are configured can make the difference between empowering and maximizing the voters' voices or minimizing and muting those voices. In most other states, politicians redraw districts and often end up drawing safe districts for themselves to allow them to stay in office. Redistricting has been used at times to exclude communities from political power. By fully participating in and monitoring the upcoming redistricting process, more communities may have the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. Speaking about your community is critical to keep your community whole to the extent possible. This ensures that your voice is heard by your elected leaders when making decisions such as the quality and funding of your child's education or determining your tax rates. Your input is valuable in shaping the new political boundaries. Next slide. So how does redistricting affect you? At the Commission, we thought it would be beneficial for us to break down how redistricting affects each individual directly. So here are 4 bucket areas. By no means is this list exhaustive. These are just several examples of how redistricting can impact you directly. So the first area, power to the people. The Voters' First Act was historic in California. It transferred the power of drawing district maps away from politicians and gave it to the people. The second bucket, championing your issues. Having the opportunity to elect representatives that champion your issues is important in a state like California, where issues can vary drastically from one street to the next. The third bucket, funding priorities. Tied to the issue of electing representatives that champion your issues, you might want to elect representatives that have your financial interests at heart. When the time comes to build a budget, you will want a representative fighting to ensure your community gets the financial resources it deserves for various services such as education, water, and fire protection. And the fourth bucket, community boundaries. The redistricting process is all about drawing lines and determining which communities get grouped into districts. Your input in this process is essential to help commissioners understand where your community starts and ends. Redistricting in California is one of the few civic activities that any Californian can provide input in regarding their community. This ultimately impacts the law and regulations, tax structure, and how funding is distributed, and which services are provided to communities. Next slide. The US Constitution requires that every American receive as close to equal representation as possible in government. As populations of districts change over time, it can leave some people overrepresented while others underrepresented in government. Redistricting evens out the population between districts. So after the federal government publishes updated census data, California must redraw the boundaries of its Congressional, State Senate, State Assembly, and State Board of Equalization districts so that the districts correctly reflect the latest count of the state's population. Redistricting is based on the idea that each of our voices should be represented fairly by creating districts that have the same number of people. Census results are used to draw new maps every 10 years to account for the ways that populations have changed and moved across the states and districts. At the federal level, reapportionment takes place to reallocate US House seats amongst the states. This too is done after each national census to ensure that seats are held by the states in proportion to the size of their population. California currently has 53 House seats, and that may change after we get the updated census numbers. Historically, legislators have drawn maps that allowed them to choose their constituents rather than enabling constituents to choose their representatives. This former system undermined the concept of fair representation, which is to give people the power to choose their representatives. Next slide. So why does independent redistricting matter? We've talked about how redistricting affects you, and now we'll explain why independent redistricting matters. Democracy depends on voters having the opportunity to choose their representatives. When elected officials redraw the lines of their own districts, they get to design their own territory and choose who their voters are. This slide highlights key terms in redistricting to help you understand why it's important to delegate the power of redistricting to the people. Gerrymandering happens when the election district boundaries are drawn in a way that gives a particular set of people, like a political party or racial group, an unfair political advantage over another. This graph percent orange and 40% purple. 5 districts can be drawn in multiple ways, but it's not always fair. The first 2 examples show 2 ways to draw district lines in a relatively fair manner, where the districts are drawn to reflect the population proportionally. The 2 examples on the far right show ways to draw district maps in a manner that does not necessarily reflect the population fairly, which is referred to as gerrymandering. This is why independent commissions, like California's commission, were created to remove the politics from the process and focus on the people. Next slide. The commission must follow these criteria in this order when drawing district maps. And I'll go over each of these 6 criteria. The first, districts must be of nearly equal population to comply with the US Constitution. The second criterion, districts must comply with the Voting Rights Act to ensure that minorities have a fair opportunity to elect representatives of their choice. Number 3, districts must draw contiguously so that all parts of the district are connected to each other. Number 4, districts must minimize the division of cities, counties, neighborhoods, and communities of interest to the extent possible. Number 5, districts should be geographically compact such that nearby areas of population are not bypassed for more distant populations. This requirement refers to density and not the shape of the district. And number 6, where practicable, each Senate district should be comprised of 2 complete and adjacent assembly districts. Board of Equalization districts should be comprised of 10 complete and adjacent state Senate districts. In addition, the place of residence of any incumbent or political candidate may not be considered in the creation of a map, and districts may not be drawn for the purpose of favoring or discriminating against an incumbent political candidate or a political party. Next slide. So we're not the only ones conducting redistricting right now. We are just one of many redistricting efforts occurring in California. The commission is responsible for redrawing districts for state offices, while counties, cities, school districts, water districts, and community college districts are also redrawing their districts at the same time. We bring this to your attention because different efforts are happening simultaneously, and it can get kind of confusing. Aside from being involved in the state redistricting process, we also encourage you to be involved in your local redistricting efforts as well. Next slide. So the history of redistricting in California, and Peter briefly touched on this in the intro. So prior to 2010, legislatures in California drew the lines. If the legislature failed to properly draw the lines, the court drew the lines. In 2008, California voters passed Proposition 11, which is the Voters First Act. This act authorized the creation of an independent commission to draw new district lines for the state Senate, state assembly, and Board of Equalization. In 2010, Proposition 20, the Voters First Act for Congress, added the responsibility of drawing congressional districts to the commission. Our goal as the commission is to spread the word that the people's role did not end with being counted in the census, and to collect valuable community input to assist us in the process of drawing new districts. The 2010 Redistricting Commission was California's first independent commission. The 2020 Redistricting Commission is building upon their work and will leave behind detailed documents to assist the 2030 Commission when they perform their duties. There are a few other states who also have independent commissions, including Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Michigan, Montana, and Washington. Next slide. So the commissioner selection process. The commissioners all went through a rigorous application process that attracted over 20,000 applicants in 2019. After initial review, over 2,000 individuals completed a supplemental application. This supplemental application included letters of recommendation, essay responses, disclosure of finances and politics, and much more. After a very thorough and public review, 120 applicants, so 40 Democrats, 40 Republicans, and 40 that identified with neither of those two parties, were invited to interview. From there, 60, so 20 Democrats, 20 Republicans, and 20 other, were chosen to be presented to the legislature. The California legislature was allowed to remove no more than 24 candidates, 8 from each of those subpools, from consideration, leaving a total of 36. The first 8 members, so 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 2 others, were selected through a public drawing in July 2020. I myself was selected through that public drawing, random selection. The final 6 members, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and 2 others, were then carefully selected by the first 8 commissioners in August 2020. We took several considerations into account and had lengthy conversations that were publicly live streamed to include political party, geography, race, gender, and expertise in the selection, the careful selection of the final 6 members. Next slide. So these are your 2020 commissioners. We are 14 members that make up the commission. So in total, we have 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, and 4 members not affiliated with either of those 2 parties. As you can see, I identify as no party preference. The commissioners are diverse in geography as they are in opinions and expertise. There are 7 folks from Northern California, 7 from Southern California. We have 8 people who identify as women, 6 people who identify as men. We range in age from the 30s to the 60s. There are NGO leaders, engineers, pastors, law enforcement officers, public health leaders, political scientists, there's a lawyer and additional public servants. You all are welcome to join us at one of our commission meetings. They're currently held online due to COVID-19 restrictions, and instructions and a link for attending our online meetings are available on our website, which I will share more details on in a bit. Next slide. So what are our duties? And I briefly had touched upon this, but let's review. After the educational sessions, which is what we're conducting right now, the commission will hold public input meetings and accept community input and public testimony to assist in drawing the new electoral maps. The commission is responsible for drawing 4 maps. So that's Congress, State Senate, State Assembly, and Board of Equalization. We've used an example here from Sacramento to demonstrate what the different maps look like for each district type. And that's just an example. Next slide. So from February to May, we are conducting these redistricting basic presentations to educate the public about the redistricting process. To help manage this, we've divided the state into 11 outreach zones, so Zone A through Zone K, to better manage our outreach efforts and to build relationships with community groups. We are eager to engage with all communities. We are more than happy to set up a redistricting basics presentation with any group that requests one. We plan to have this presentation available in video form in case groups would prefer that option as well. Next slide. So communities of interest, this is a really key point. When drawing maps, we have to be very mindful of communities of interest. We can obtain the city and county information, but we need the communities of interest information directly from Californians. Communities of interest are defined as a concentrated population which shares common social and economic interests that should be included within a single district for the purposes of its effective and fair representation. Examples include areas in which people share similar living standards, have similar cultures, use the same transportation facilities, have similar work opportunities, or have access to the same media. People can belong to multiple communities of interest as well. Keep in mind that a community of interest is not the same as a district, but communities of interest are a key building block of districts. Some ways to describe your community include geographic, so waterways, rural, urban, mountains. You can talk about boundaries, so cities, towns, counties, school areas, or anything else that you might have in common. Next slide. Communities of interest can be described by creating to define a community of interest. The following are basic elements to help you define. So you can provide oral testimony. These can be personal stories. You can share examples of things members of your community have in common, what makes your community unique. Imagine describing your community to a visitor from out of town. Does your neighborhood share certain celebrations or traditions like street festivals or parades? Are there important places where your community gathers like parks or community centers? What is the history of your community and how your community comes together? This can be done at commission meetings or hearings. You can also provide written testimony. A written description can be used to tell your community story as well. You can describe what connects the people and why it's important that they be kept together during redistricting. Whenever possible, you can include statistics to support your testimonies, including data on ethnicity, religious groups, educational levels, graduation rates, median household incomes, poverty levels, access to technology, home ownership rates, and the list goes on and on. Consider using reliable sources such as the Census Bureau. Community issues. Communities often get involved in redistricting because they feel their issues have not been adequately addressed by their elected representatives. Highlighting community issues in personal stories and written narratives help demonstrate the importance of having elected officials who understand and respond to services, better schools, roads, health centers in your neighborhoods. You can also talk about whether you've worked for more recognition or support of your community, like having holidays recognized or historical events commemorated. Lastly, boundary maps. You can create a map of your neighborhood or area. You can mark the street names and significant locations. You can include significant landmarks and gathering places, including social service agencies, community centers, shopping districts, schools, and religious places. Next slide. So how do you get involved in this process? So we have several ways in which folks can get involved, but the steps in this process first would be to actually describe your community. And we went through several different ways to do that. And those were just examples of how you could potentially describe your community. The second would be to draw your community on a map. And then the third, send your testimony directly to the commission. Next slide. So here are the specific ways in which you can provide that public input. So we went through different examples of what community of interest information looks like, the different steps to get that information to the commission, and here are the ways to actually contact us. So the first is a community of interest mapping tool. That tool can be found at drawmycacommunity.org. That tool allows users to go in, and it's sort of like a Google Maps where you can go directly into a mapping platform and draw your community of interest directly on a map. You can also attach written testimony with your drawn map to submit as a package directly to the commission. This tool is actually available in a variety of different languages, including Spanish, Simplified Chinese, Traditional Chinese, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Korean, Armenian, Farsi, Arabic, Russian, Japanese, Punjabi, and Khmer. You can visit our website, redrawthelinesca.org. We have our information regarding email. You can contact us by email with your input. You can contact us by phone with your input, and you can also send in snail mail to our headquarters up in Sacramento. Next slide. So language access is a very, very important part and a very important piece to the commissioners. We've taken several steps to ensure more Californians will be able to participate in this process, regardless of their English abilities. So we are working on translating materials. We have our fact sheets and flyers, our FAQs, and our redistricting basics presentations in the process of being translated into those languages that I had listed previously. We may also provide interpretation services for public comment sections of our business meetings. Granted, we need a 5-day advance notice so we can properly accommodate and prepare for those translations. We also will be translating any written public input. So folks can send in their written public input to the CRC in any language, and we will translate that into English. If you need an interpreter to provide input during a meeting, we ask that you notify the commission ahead of that meeting, so particularly 5 days ahead of that business meeting to request those interpreter services. And we will do our best to contract an interpreter in that requested language. Next slide. So this is where things get interesting. If the former conversation wasn't interesting enough, the California Supreme Court ruled in advance of our deadline to help us with all of the things that have been presented by COVID-19. So COVID-19 has delayed many things, including our ability to access census data to help us draw and redistrict in California. On February 12th, 2021, the US Census Bureau announced that it would deliver redistricting data to all states by September 30th, 2021. And in March, the Census Bureau announced it would provide the census data in a legacy format in late August. So any delay after July 31st in the state receiving the census data means that the commission's final maps would be due after December 15th, which is what was ruled in this California Supreme Court ruling. So currently we are working with the legislature and other stakeholders to minimize the impact of the delay on the 2022 elections. Next slide. So this is our rough timeline. The US Census Bureau continues to update us about the expected availability of census data, and we will continue to adjust our timeline as needed. So currently we are in the educational presentations phase of our outreach. From June to August, we hope to hold our public input meetings. This is where folks can come into our live meetings and provide their testimony of where their communities of interest are, if they have not done so already by using the COI tool. From August 15th to August 30th, we might get the census data in that legacy format. California has the skills and the talent to adjust that legacy formatted data into the needed format for redistricting purposes. So we don't have yet a firm date from the US Census Bureau on when this legacy format data is expected to be delivered, but they did announce mid to late August. So that's why we have 15th to the 30th. So after we receive that legacy data, California will adjust that into a usable format. We also are unique in that we allocate those who are imprisoned by their last known address and not their place of imprisonment. So the statewide database out of UC Berkeley will be responsible for adjusting the census data to accommodate and change for that method. So they are expecting to get that data to the Commission between September 30th and October 31st, depending on when we receive that census data from the US Census Bureau. And then from October to December, we'll continue to hold public input meetings, and then we'll also start holding our line drawing sessions. From November to December, we hope to have our draft district maps released, and these draft maps will be put out to the public for comment. So you all can tell us, we got this completely wrong, or kudos in this area and we need to adjust this other area of California. So that part of the process will really rely heavily on input again from Californians. And then from December 2021 to next year, February 2022, we will have a revised version of those district maps released once we incorporate that additional feedback. And then we expect between December of this year and February of next year to deliver those final maps to the Secretary of State's office. I would really emphasize on this timeline piece, this slide changes very frequently. We are trying our best to work with the delays that have been caused by COVID-19 in the delivery of the census data. So I would really encourage folks to follow along closely, as this timeline might change again. Next slide. So just to taking any input regarding redistricting, and specifically the lines and COI input, community of interest input, outside of a regularly scheduled commission meeting. However, I do encourage you all to visit our website at redrawthelinesc.org to provide your input. Our COI tool is up and running and available in many different languages. We also have additional instructions on how you all can provide your public comment and your COI information to the Commission directly. And you do not have to wait until we go out and start holding our public input meetings. You can use the avenues that are available on our website to do that now. Next slide. So I encourage you all to contact us if you have any additional questions or thoughts. You can contact our team member here, Patricia. We have her email address written out. We are up and running on various social media platforms as well. Our handle is WeDrawTheLinesCA. I encourage you to like, subscribe, follow, and follow along with this redistricting process, which is a once-in-a-decade process here in California. And with that, I will turn it back over to Peter.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And we really appreciate you being here and speaking to our community. We do have a few questions for you. So first, I know there were you had spoke about gerrymandering and kind of keeping the process and all that, but how can we be confident that there's no political interference in creating the districts?
That's a great question. And one of the ways, well, I can list out several ways. One, everything is public. Our meetings are all public. We have guidance under the Bagley-Keynes Open Meetings Act, which requires any conversation between between 3 or more commissioners to happen in public open meeting. There was also some vetting that done in the application process for us ourselves. So some of the criteria we had to fall under was we had to have voted in 2 out of the 3 previous statewide elections. We could not have been an elected official during the time of our appointment. And there's also some restrictions after the fact for us. So as I serve as a commissioner, I am no longer eligible to run for elected office for 10 years, which is the time frame that these maps would be in place. I am not eligible to work in a paid capacity for any elected official in the state for a time period of 5 years from the date of appointment. So I am hopeful that Californians will watch along in this process. And being an independent commission, I did not have vast redistricting experience ahead of this application process. I heard the call on a radio ad. I put my name in the hat and ended up sitting in the seat.
And here you are.
Yeah, and here I am. So I understand that, we are very cautious and sometimes can be skeptical about what goes on behind closed doors. The most easiest part about this process for me is that there are no closed doors. I don't have to remember what I can and cannot share because everything is something that I should be sharing with Californians.
Right, and I believe you mentioned this earlier. Everything is recorded, just like we've recorded this meeting for you guys to have made public. Everything is recorded, so if you miss a meeting, you just visit the website and you can go back and check it out, correct?
Yes, exactly. So every meeting that commissioners have with folks for these informational sessions, such as the one I'm having right now, is recorded and the video is posted on our website. That also ties into that government code that I'm not allowed to take this public input in these settings for the purposes of being transparent, right? So if folks provided me input in this setting, my colleagues would not have heard that input. Other Californians would not have heard that input, and that it kind of is not fair. It's not fair for us to have that input in our minds without having it being shared to everyone else. So if you are interested, there's definitely other videos that we have posted on our website of other commissioners holding these types of meetings on our website.
Perfect. So obviously with last year and the pandemic, everything going on, there were quite a lot of issues with the census. How can we be sure, I guess now when we receive the new, or when you receive the new census information, is how can we be sure that the lines will kind of be a true representation? I mean, has that been taken into consideration on how the census was, handled last year and all that?
That's a good question. I've heard this question a number of times now. And my answer to that question is I haven't seen the census data, so I don't know what it is going to look like. That question has come up multiple times. How can we be sure? At this point, we haven't even begun the drawing process of drawing these districts. We're still in that COI input phase and the education input phase. So I wouldn't even be able to speak to that. I would say though, once that census data is released to California, it's released to all of California. So I should be able to access it on a publicly available website, and so should everyone else. I encourage you all to check out the statewide database out of UC Berkeley, which is the entity that's responsible for holding that census data.
Okay. So as as Santa Clarita being the 3rd largest city in LA County, how can we work to ensure the commission understands the importance of maintaining or strengthening Santa Clarita as a community of interest, and that our community isn't, unnecessarily divided or split up?
That's a good question and very timely. I encourage everyone to submit through the COI tool. I encourage folks to share with your networks, your family, your friends, your local grocers to submit their input through the COI tool. This process is very heavily reliant upon people. It's reliant on people coming to us and telling us where their communities are. I provide you an example of the extreme opposite. Let's say, for example, nobody in California provides input about where their communities of interest are. It makes my job significantly more difficult in drawing districts because I would have no idea. And particularly for LA region, I'm not from LA. So the more input that I see from people from LA regarding communities of interest or the city of Santa Clarita, the more helpful it will be. So I really encourage people to share the COI tool far and wide with everyone and anyone. And if you need additional help accessing it, please contact us. We do have it in different languages so people can submit their input regardless of their English abilities. And that is probably one of the most significant pieces of getting involved in this process. Of course, you know, after we get all the COI data and we start discussing and deliberating actual district lines, all of those meetings will also be public and available. Knock on wood, hopefully we can meet in person by then. But I encourage you all to follow along closely during that process as well, and essentially follow along all the way through to the submission of these final maps to the Secretary of State. These maps are our maps. They're Californian people's maps. They don't belong to the legislature. They don't belong to elected officials. They belong to the people of California. So I encourage the people to voice their input.
Okay. And so with that, is there, is there a way that we could request, whether it be a commission meeting or whatever, for it to be held in Santa Clarita, where I don't want to say it's specifically for the people of Santa Clarita, but at least something here for Santa Clarita residents to be more a part of?
That's a great question. And I'm smiling because we just had this conversation in our open meeting last week, in which our director is putting together an outreach plan on how do we connect with all of the people in California. And we are in the process of creating a hybrid model. So some online, some in person, pending COVID situations. That I would emphasize that we are not allowed to turn anyone away for public comment, right? So if we house a meeting in Santa Clarita, whether that's online or in person, and someone comes from, let's say, San Jose or Redding, California, and wants to provide their input to the commission, we can't turn them away. We do have hopes and intentions of, if we can meet in person, to travel to all different parts of California. If Santa Clarita is really wanting a focused location within the city, I encourage you all to submit that to the commission. I'm one of 14, so you can think of it as I have 1/14th decision-making power in the group. So I encourage you all to voice that and say, hey, we want a destination here for input, community input.
Okay, and I apologize if it was missed. I know you had it on an earlier slide, but timeline, when would those meetings be if they get started in person?
If they could start in person is a big asterisk, because we are under Governor Newsom's executive orders. I'm sure everyone has heard that the state is announcing June 15th, I believe it was, but I don't know what that means in terms of allowing government agencies or groups to start meeting in person. I'm still unclear about that, so we're waiting on guidance about that. I would also highlight that we're in the process of hiring community leads. So if folks know of people who would be great candidates for community leads to visit our website. These folks will help us with the outreach efforts, and we actually have additional folks for LA area because of the dense population. So I encourage folks to visit our website and see those job postings. If you can get someone in the candidate pool from your community, that would be great.
Okay. Backtracking to you guys, the commissioners, I know you went through kind of the process of all that, but who chose the members of the commission?
So the interview process was done by the California State Auditor's Office. They put out the call for applications in the summer of 2019. And the panel, which they called the ARP, the Applicant Review Panel, consisted of one Democrat, one Republican, and one no party affiliate. And they reviewed the applications. They reviewed them all in public open session. It was sometimes nerve-wracking watching three people you don't know have a conversation about you and your whole life. And it was also at times intimidating because I didn't vote for this act. I was in high school when this act was on the ballot, so I was not eligible to vote for it. So it was really intimidating at times as well to hear the vast experience that the candidates had in the pool. Ultimately, the California State Auditor's Office, the Applicant Review Panel, submitted that final list to the California State Legislature. And this is something that I learned is written in the Voters First Act, that the legislature has the authority to strike up to 8 names per pool, and then transmitted that list back to the auditor's office, in which they did that random drawing. And I was selected off of one of those bingo balls.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. Well, we should start with that. Congratulations, especially after seeing the numbers of how many applicants there were. So, and we're happy to have you. So once the maps are drawn and they're submitted and finalized and all, can they be legally challenged?
Yes, they can. So litigation does happen. Folks can litigate the final maps that have been submitted. I don't know what that process is going to look like for the maps that we will submit, what the courts will decide. So that is all forthcoming. We do have counsel guiding us through this process. We are, if you watched some of our open meetings, I want to say like 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, we did decide and vote on hiring of VRA counsel, Voting Rights Act counsel, as well as outside litigation counsel. And these agencies or firms, I guess in the legal sense, would play the role in helping us defend the maps, as well as guiding us through the process of actually drawing these lines to make sure that we are complying with Federal Voting Rights Act as well as California Voting Rights Act.
Gotcha. And then, sorry, just not to backtrack on again, having, possibly a meeting, let's say in Santa Clarita. And I know you mentioned, we would reach out to the commission and urge that we want a meeting here. As far as location goes, is that something, the commission would come out and say, hey, we look for this type of place, or we're going to hold the meeting here? Or is that when we do the request, say, we have X facility in Santa Clarita and we want to host our meeting there?
Well, that would be a nice welcome. We as a commission, it's our responsibility, right, to go out to the communities and making sure that we have the venues, we have the ability to host people pending COVID. What does that look like? Are we in an outdoor setting? Are we inside, socially distanced? What does that look like? So our team is having all of these conversations right now. I don't think it would be a bad thing if someone came to us and said, hey, come to us, we have a venue, we have this, we have this. I'm sure our team will review that and take a very close look at it in consideration for hosting a meeting in certain locations. We haven't firmly established exactly which locations our meetings would be happening yet. So this is a great time to bring this forward to the commission. as we get further and further into the summer, I see us in our open meetings having these conversations about establishing when are we meeting, how many times are we meeting, where are we meeting, and then continuing on with the conversation of that hybrid model. Because, you know, online, I'm sure we're all tired of this online world, but online is also increasing accessibility to people who otherwise would not spend hours upon hours sitting at, you know, a boring government meeting, right? So we're excited at the opportunity of going out in person, but also using this opportunity to engage with more people.
Okay, and then, you know, because we have this slide for people to kind of get all the contact detail, would it work for people to email Patricia for that stuff, or should that come straight to the commissioners?
You can email Patricia. Her email address is there. We also have our general email address on our website as well, and we have a whole bunch of information on our website on how to contact us. If folks have other networks in which they would like a similar informational session, we are glad to come out right now virtually to do that. We will be transitioning, hopefully in sometime in June, to incorporating additional COI trainings and COI information, so people can get really geared up for submitting that input as well. So follow along as we continue to shift and build this as we continue on through this journey.
Perfect. And then I know when you were speaking about public comment and all that, especially for non-English speakers, you know, they can submit in their language and you guys will work to get it translated in English. As far as like the materials that you guys have that are already translated, is it too late to get those materials translated to a different language that you guys don't already have? You know, is there a way for someone to submit a language and say, hey, in my region, there's X amount of this language speaking people, and, you know, we'd like to get the fact sheet, the FAQ and all that stuff translated?
Yeah. That's a really good question. And we had a lot of conversation about this, about language access and how best we can utilize all of the resources that we have to engage the most people across California. We landed on the standard languages outlined by the Secretary of State's Office for Voting Purposes. And then we also added additional languages. In terms of adding more, I think that's a valid question to bring up to the commission on how can we add more. It would be extremely helpful if we also knew people, or that community group knew someone who can translate that document in the most accurate way possible, and help us provide that to the community. So we're definitely open to that. In terms of, and I'm not serving on the language access subcommittee, so I'm trying to recall all of the details that they have, but I don't think it's gonna hurt to ask. If anything, it will continuously bring up the issue of language and language accessibility in our ability to participate in our government.
Gotcha. Well, with that, Commissioner, I do want to be respectful of your time, and I thank you for being here with us and sharing this valuable information. I want to thank everybody who did join as well and submitted their questions. As the Commissioner mentioned, you know, all of this information is public, it is online, the website's on the slide, you know, please visit, and you guys have contact details there. If anything else comes up, please feel free to reach out to myself. I can get it over to Commissioner Ahmad as well, and she'll get you the necessary information or put us in touch with the right people. But again, Commissioner, thank you for being here. We really, really do appreciate it. And again, everybody else, thank you for being here, and I hope you're all safe and healthy at this time, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thank you, everyone.